Here today. We are out here for Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. What's his name? 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 Scream his name.
By now, we've all seen the photos from Black Lives Matter protests calling for the end of racism, sparked after the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police on the 25th of May, 2020. In this video, I want to highlight the Black voices and the Polish activists that I've seen organizing in the past few weeks. As of this video, on the 15th of June, Poland's had 19 Black Lives Matter protests in 13 different cities. I was originally going to use the song of TikTok fame Who's Next for this part, but there's too many cities now. Warsaw, Krakow, Gdańsk, Poznań, Wrocław, Grudziądz, Szczecin, Białystok, Katowice, Zielona Góra, Koszalin, Toruń, and Bydgoszcz. Please keep in mind, this is not a complete list. There might be events I missed, and there are more being organized. Some of these are huge marches, such as in Warsaw and Krakow. Some of these are smaller vigils. But I think it's really important to take a look at what's happening in Poland. While marches with thousands of people are impressive, small-scale demonstrations are just as important. Similar to the number of Black Lives Matter events organized in rural areas in the southern U.S., I think these protests show a shift in thinking, especially among young people. In this video, I want to go over the timeline of the different Black Lives Matter marches, vigils, and demonstrations throughout Poland. Also, I did organize a few of these events in Wrocław and Krakow, and I'll make sure to say which ones I was involved with. However, these events were largely organized separately from one another. The main kind of help between the groups was tips on how to make sure the event was legal and who to speak to about a wireless microphone and speakers. Before we jump into the protest, I want to give a little background on race in Poland and why these protests are happening here. While Poland doesn't have the same history with colonialism and slavery like other Western European countries did, that doesn't mean Poland doesn't have issues with racism, both past and current. The country has had serious issues with nationalism for several years now, as far-right groups have taken over Poland's Independence Day parades on the 11th of November. The nationalists are encouraged, in part, by the conservative right-wing ruling party, PiS, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, or Peace and Justice in English. PiS has been openly hostile to immigrants, especially during the refugee crisis. To me, this has allowed casual racism to flourish in Poland. On a more general level, I think Polish society has been struggling with issues of identity around this issue. While Poland is largely white, there are Black Polish people. I have seen a lot of reflection across Polish social media, for example, the word Murzyn. It's a word that refers to Black people, and it's been criticized a lot recently for being pejorative and insulting. I admit I flinched when I saw this photo from a protest taken in Warsaw on the 4th of June, which reads, "Don't call me Murzyn." To me, the word reminds me of Poland's racist past, like the poem Mrzanek Bambo, a 1935 poem about an African child, which ends with the child afraid to take a bath because he'll wash the black off, or the Kiełczyckie Murzynki, a vulgar name which refers to a Black woman's breasts. I cover a lot of these things in my video on Olga Tokarczuk's dreadlocks. I don't care if this word has its roots in the Spanish word more. Given how it's used, I don't think anyone can actually say there are insulting connotations to this word. Trying to argue that these things, like the poem, are just products of their time doesn't hold up. They reflect their time, sure, and that time was racist against Black people. If you're still not convinced, here's 5 Black women discussing, in Polish, why they don't like to be called Murzyn. Racism isn't just an American issue. It's a problem that a lot of countries have, including Poland. Okay, with background out of the way, let's get to the good stuff, the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Poland. The first BLM event in Poland was the 31st of May in front of the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. Hosted by Przychodnia Skłot, a lefty nonprofit, the idea was to leave candles and flowers as a tribute to George Floyd. The candles are the kind used for graves, especially on All Saints' Day, and burn for around 48 hours. However, there was a slight disagreement if flowers could be left there. Police asked people not to leave anything at the embassy, but later Georgia Moswaker, the United States ambassador to Poland, said it was a misunderstanding and that flowers could be left. This was just the first of several events in Warsaw. This event caught my attention, and I organized a similar one in front of the U.S. Consulate General in Krakow on the 31st of May. A similar idea, leaving flowers, posters, and candles. About 20 people came over the course of a few hours, and I figured I would have a similar turnout to an event I organized in Wrocław the next day on the 1st of June. I was wrong. When I walked into Plac Solnej, there were around 100 people gathered, some with flowers, some with banners. I hadn't realized how much the issue of racism would catch people's attention here. The police did ask me some questions, and with the help from fellow activist Anka Zwyrolka, I explained I hadn't expected so many people, and luckily the police allowed us to go forward, even without a permit. I was very moved to see so many people there. I stayed at the site until around midnight, and people were continually coming and leaving flowers and candles. It was very peaceful. And that was a smaller event in Wrocław. A larger one took place a week later. Likely inspired by Warsaw, soon people organized events in other Polish cities. Some were by nonprofits, some were just organized by young people. On Wednesday, the 3rd of June, in Grudziądz, a medium-sized city in northern Poland, had a demonstration called Każdy inny, wszyscy tacy sami, which means everyone is the same. It was organized by Mateusz Orzeskowi and Grudziądz Pszew's Nanowici, a nonprofit whose name means Grudziądz Against Hatred. Around 60 people took part in the silent demonstration in memory of Floyd. The same day in Poznań, people gathered in the main square with signs. In addition, this was the first protest that had Polish people laying down in a visual show of solidarity to George Floyd. It was organized by Black Venus Protest, a feminist group. These memorials and demonstrations were just the beginning, as later on that week, more and more events took place with increasing numbers of people.
Justice for Brianna! Justice for Brianna!
The second demonstration in Warsaw took place on the 4th of June, organized by No Justice, No Peace, Poland. I just loved their banner. Unlike the vigil from the weekend, this was a definite protest, people with signs and masks gathering and chanting in front of the U.S. Embassy.
Amongst you, is this my country, my home country where I was born? No, but I feel that this is my country because you make me feel like one of you. I feel like I am
Justice, no peace. No 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 justice, no peace.
This was a warm-up to 6 different protests against racism across Poland that weekend. In Toruń, northern Poland, a group of activists in Bydgoszcz gathered on the main square on Friday the 5th of June. While both these protests were on a smaller scale, I think they're important, as they show this wasn't just happening in larger cities. This was the same day an event took place in Katowice, an industrial city in the south. This was organized by Nie Składamy Parasolek and Łańcuch Ludzi Śląsk, a feminist group. Looking at the photos, it's clear that these events are organized by young people and by the number of rainbow masks with the support of the LGBT community. In Gdańsk, a demonstration took place on the 6th of June, hosted by Pomorski Protest Przeciwko Rasizmowi, which means protest against racism. It was also organized by Weronika Brylowska and Dagmara Szczęsmanska, and about 500 people came with signs in English and Polish, such as Nie mogę oddychać, which means I can't breathe in Polish. Also in the north, in Szczecin, a demonstration called Sprawiedliwość dla George'a Floyda, Justice for George Floyd, was organized by Razem Szczecin and Młodzi Razem Zakony Pomorskie, youth organizations affiliated with the leftist political group Razem. The event began near an overpass that had been defaced by Black Lives Matter graffiti, and the groups wanted to make clear it wasn't them by cleaning it up. around 200 people attended. Another northern city, Białystok, had a demonstration on the 6th of June, organized by Gabriela Przybylowska. This one really impressed me, as last summer Białystok made international headlines when it saw violent responses to its Pride March in July. That around 140 people gathered for a memorial in the town's main square is amazing, not to mention brave. In Wrocław, a march called Wszyscy Równi, which means everyone is equal, everyone is the same, drew around 150 people. We marched from the main square to Park Staromiejski to hear several speakers. I was there to take these photos, and I can attest to the police asking us to spread out and to keep our masks on. Honestly, I was okay with that. I think the crowd was as well. The event was organized by 4 young people, Felix Homa, Aleksandra Piechnik, Krystiana Wojcinski, and Ron Hubert. Easily the largest event on Saturday was the 3rd Black Lives Matter event in Warsaw. This one was called Dość rasizmu I przemocy policji, Solidarność z budentem w USA, which means enough of racism and police violence, solidarity with the protests in the US. Organized by Zjednoczeni Przeciw Rasizmowi, a group called United Against Racism, this one also took place at the embassy and attracted between 2,000 to 3,000 people. On Sunday, the 7th of June in Krakow, over 1,000 people marched around the main square before gathering in Mała Rynek to hear speeches from people of color. Disclosure, I organized this one, and it came together better than I ever could have imagined, and not without the help of so many volunteers. In particular, Filip Kowalski, Ariana Reid, and Marysia Lubomska. Marysia was amazing at organizing the crowd and getting a group of volunteers together. Special thanks to the people at Spoldzielnia for providing sound equipment to make this happen. To see so many Poles come together despite the pandemic and the rain, making it happen wasn't easy. To organize a public demonstration in Poland, you need to fill out a document and give it to the city at least 3 days before the event takes place. Also, the police were quite strict in Krakow regarding pandemic rules. We had to divide our march into groups of 150 people. This worked out to our advantage because it made counting easier, and we had 7 groups of at least 150. At the end of the march, we gathered in Mała Rynek. At the end of the video, I'll share some of the speeches in English and Polish from that day. Also, I was very touched as the display of flowers, photos, and candles was still at the consulate, and people were continually adding to it. The thousands in Warsaw and Krakow were not the end. In Toruń, a city north of Poznań, postponed their protest due to rain, but they did hold it in the main square on the 9th of June, organized by Toruńska Brigada Feministyczna. There are still events happening. There are 2 this weekend in Krakow and 1 in Koszalin. A second demonstration happened in Poznań on the 10th of June, and a march in Zielona Góra drew around 200 people. What I'm hopeful for is the momentum of this, to make real, lasting change. Maybe more people having uncomfortable conversations with racist relatives. Maybe people taking long looks at themselves. But the energy I've seen from these protests has been so powerful, I think we'll see some real positive changes. I said at the beginning that I want to amplify Black voices and Polish activists, so here are some of the speeches from the march in Krakow the 7th of June. They gave me goosebumps and made me think. And hopefully they'll do the same for you.
Zgromadziliśmy się tutaj dzisiaj, bo kolejny raz policjant nie miał żadnego poważania dla życia czarnej osoby. Derek nie przejmował się prośbami George'a, którego dusił kolanem. Tym, że mężczyzna jest mordowany, nie przejmowali się też Tomasz, Aleksander i Toruń, którzy nie reagowali na to, co robili. Konsekwencji nie chciano na początku wyciągnąć. Tak jak kuria w Polsce, w przypadku pedofila. I policja najchętniej. chętnie przeniosłaby policjantów do innego stanu i po sprawie. Ale czarni w Stanach mają dość strachu, dość traktowania ich jak śmieci przez ludzi, którzy powinni ich bronić. I dlatego teraz trwają protesty. My, będąc tutaj w Polsce, niewiele możemy zrobić. Nie wywrzemy żadnej znaczącej presji na rządzących w USA. Nie damy znaczącego wsparcia finansowego, bo przecież wiemy, jak złoty stoi do dolara. Ale mamy też w Polsce swój problem z rasizmem i z policją. Na szczęście w Polsce policja jeszcze nie biega z karabinami po ulicach, ale i tak mamy swoje ofiary przemocy policyjnej. Przypomnijmy sobie dzisiaj, jak policjant 23 maja 2010 roku zastrzelił nigeryjskiego imigranta Maxwella Itoje w Warszawie. Przypomnijmy sobie, że wobec funkcjonariusza, który zamordował Maxwella, nie zostały wyciągnięte konsekwencje. Przypomnijmy sobie kolejną ofiarę policyjnej przemocy, Igora Stachowiaka, którego torturowano i zabito na komisariacie, rażąc go prądem. Przypomnijmy sobie, jak bezprawnie służby przetrzymywały w ośrodku dla uchodźców i deportowały doktoranta UJ Amira. Przypomnijmy sobie każdą ofiarę ksenofobicznych ataków na terenie Polski i jak ignorowane są wzrost uprzedzeń i rasistowskie wypowiedzi prawicowych polityków. Pamiętajmy o tym wszystkim codziennie i tak jak dzisiaj Amerykanie walczą na ulicach o to, aby zaczęto szanować czarne życia, tak i my zadbajmy, aby policjanci wiedzieli, że patrzymy im na ręce i aby w naszym otoczeniu nie było miejsca dla rasizmu. Dziękuję.
Don't say you're fighting for black people, don't say you're fighting for colored people. You're fighting to save our humanity because our humanity is on the line. We defy the rain today, we defy the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, we defy the rain. Why? Because there is a bigger pandemic amongst us. Racism. It's killing us. I mean, as human beings, we fight to save, we value diversity. We fight to save endangered species. When some iguanas are dying somewhere, we're fighting for them. But what more of our own species? We're killing one side of our species. We're killing black people. We're killing colored people for nothing. We're all pink and stinky in the inside. Like, we're going to die someday. We're all going to be judged. And today we're out. Like, today we are the jury. We are the judge and jury for racism. I'm really glad we're out here today. And thank you all for coming out. Again, what's his name? What's his name? What's his name? Say his name. There's beauty in diversity, people. Keep it up.
Imagine a man breaks into your home, enters your parents' bedroom, kills your father, rapes and stabs your mother, enters your baby sister's room and throws her out the window, goes into your brother's room and ships him to a foreign land he knows nothing of, not to become a lawyer, not to become an entrepreneur, no, to become a slave. Imagine. Imagine your brother is left to know that his history begins in chains, that the black man was born in shackles on necks and ankles. Imagine. Imagine waking up every single morning and seeing strange fruit hanging from a tree. Imagine seeing your brothers and sisters hanging from trees. Imagine. Imagine you yourself in this house with this man who has now proceeded to eat every single thing inside your house. And you seek refuge from your neighbors, only to realize that this man and his friends have also looted their houses and have also killed your neighbors. I want you to imagine walking outside of your house and being seen as an object of sexual pleasure, being afraid of your womanhood. I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine that this same man, qui parlait en français, goes to his house and asks you to pay reparations to him for killing your family, destroying your house. Can you imagine? And now can you imagine this same man tells you you cannot be angry, This same man tells you, no, calm down. Excuse me, I will not calm down. Because to this man, he is left to imagine. And that is the privilege. It is the privilege of imagination. But for people who look like me, it is my reality. It is a nightmare. I am proud of my blackness. I am proud of my womanhood. Because when they killed George Floyd, they did not just kill a black man. They killed a father. They killed a brother. They killed an uncle. They killed a son. Because when they killed Breonna Taylor, they didn't just kill another black woman. They killed a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter. I will not omit pieces of myself because being black is who I am. Being a woman is who I am. I will not omit pieces of myself to justify my existence. Because before I was a label, before I was a stereotype, before I was a category, I began to breathe. My beginning is breath, and that is what makes me human. And if you can't see that, then that's a problem. Because I am human, just like yourself. Thank you.
I want you all to realize that the fight does not end here. It did not end with your Instagram posts, and it does not end with your black friends. The conversation needs to continue to happen. The conversation needs to continue to happen in your homes, in your friendship circles, in your businesses, in your schools. You need to look within yourselves and see your privilege or where you are lacking. We are all the same, and yet we are all different, and that is so, so beautiful. I look amongst all of you right now, so many different people, but they're also beautiful, and also strong, and also courageous. Because I cannot make a change for black people on my own. I need all of you. I need everyone to stand with me. And keep that same energy. This energy that you have here, keep this same energy tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, until you die with your children. Teach them the right thing. And what I see before me right now is the future. The future is bright because I see love, and love fixes everything. Racism is hate, and we don't want hate. We want love to heal. Thank you.
Słyszeliście i słyszałyście o 13. poprawce do Konstytucji USA? To poprawka, która rzekomo zniosła niewolnictwo w Stanach. Rzekomo, bo przecież wiemy, że prawo stanowione funkcjonuje przede wszystkim w dwóch wymiarach. Po pierwsze, jest pretekstem do przemocy i wyzysku dokonywanych na grupach dyskryminowanych, najbiedniejszych i wykluczanych. Po drugie, jest po prostu zwykłą fikcją, tworzącą iluzję, że nie zgadzamy się na przemoc. Przemoc państwa wobec nas, przemoc policji, przemoc kapitalistów wobec pracujących, przemoc bogatych dokonywaną na biednych. Kiedy tłumy protestują przeciwko tej przemocy, Donald Trump chowa się w schronie. Kiedy zdenerwowana na nierówność społeczność nie godzi się na panujący porządek i demonstruje go na ulicach, bogaci siedzą przed wielkimi telewizorami i oglądają to, co się dzieje, jak wielkie widowisko. To nie mieści nam się w głowach, te nierówności, które widać gołym okiem, a wmawia się nam, że one nie istnieją. Nie musimy patrzeć w telewizor czy internet, żeby je dostrzec. W czasie epidemii ulice Krakowa opustoszały. Mieszkańcy i mieszkanki zamknęli się w domach, turyści wyjechali. W przestrzeni miasta widoczne były osoby bezdomne. Kobiety żyjące w przemocowych związkach były narażone na dużo częstszą przemoc ze strony oprawcy. Tysiące dzieci żyjące w rodzinach o niskich dochodach, w problemowych środowiskach, niezdolne było do uczestnictwa w zdalnej edukacji. Kto się tymi grupami zainteresował? Władza? Policja? Prezesi korporacji? Wcale nie. Nierówności są, a wina za ich istnienie leży tylko i wyłącznie po stronie tych, którym zachciało się władzy i pieniędzy. My ich nie chcemy. Zależy nam na równości, samopomocy i godnych warunkach do realizacji swoich potrzeb. Potrzeb niezwiązanych z dzikim rynkiem i nakręcaną nawet w czasie kryzysu konsumpcją. Chcemy godnie żyć i móc oddychać.
Do you guys remember how the Stonewall riot started? A black trans woman, Marysia Lubomska. She brought a brick and a cup, and that's how we have pride. I need you guys to carry this energy with you for the rest of your lives, because we as a generation have amazing easiness to get information. We can spread words, we can spread messages at the brink of a second, at the blink of an eye. That's what I need you guys to do. I need you guys to carry this. I need you guys to carry this with me. We are the change. We are one, we are strong, we will change the world.